And joining us now on the line from Stanford, California to tell us how unified Germany is, Josef Joffe, the publisher and editor of the influential German weekly newspaper Die Zeit. Guten Abend, mein Herr. How are you this evening?
Guten Abend. Your German is impeccable.
Well, not impeccable, but I'm doing the best I can. Joseph, let's start with this. We recently learned, after some documents were revealed, that Margaret Thatcher and François Mitterrand both had some very nervous private conversations about the reunification of Germany. Thatcher saying, "We beat the Germans twice and now they're back." How widespread in the rest of Europe was German reunification?
How widespread was reunification or opposition?
How widespread was the concern, the nervousness about it?
You know, I think everybody was concerned, including the Germans, including the Americans, including the Russians, and I think everybody was so much taken by surprise that the normal reaction of politicos and officials is, let's get control over what seems to be uncontrollable. Let's order this, let's turn this into an orderly process. The people milling back and forth, so to speak, across the wall, the Velvet Revolutions in Eastern Europe. This was all a bit too fast, and it had evaded the control of politics. So even Helmut Kohl was taken by surprise, and even he didn't go rah, rah, rah for reunification. It took him about 2 weeks to formulate a very timid plan, his famous 10-point plan, which vaguely talked about some kind of confederation, but not about reunification. So I think everybody was concerned that things might get out of hand and that somebody would be losing his nerve. And so Monsieur Mitterrand and Margaret Thatcher were perhaps most outspoken in trying to break this, but all the principals were worried. Politicos don't like uncontrollable change.
Now let's look at what's happening today. How does the traditional anxiety about a unified Germany affect the foreign policy decision that German decision makers are making today?
Well, the most interesting thing is that the Germany we used to know no longer exists. What do I mean? The Germans were the most aggressive, were the people that displayed the most aggressive and destructive nationalism in the first half of the 20th century. Today, the Germans are about as aggressive as pussycats. None of the cliches that we used to bandy around about the Germans works. They don't like to use military force. They don't throw their weight around. They have remained strongly anchored in the various post-war communities, notably NATO and the European Union. And don't forget, because they knew about the worries about reunification, Helmut Kohl, then the Chancellor, gave everybody the most reassuring gift he could have given them, which was to integrate the almighty Deutsche Mark in European monetary union. So that is Germany today, and if you look at Frau Merkel today, she hardly reminds you of those German figures that we recall from the past, like Kaiser Bill, let alone Adolf Hitler. The Germans have become un-German, so to speak.
Un-German,
They've become
okay.
good citizens.
Well, let me ask you whether...
Given the cliche.
No, I understand. If you say they've become pussycats today, is it also fair to say that the fear of a hyper-aggressive Germany still exists in spite of that?
I don't think so. I think there has been a slow but thorough revision of the German image in the eyes of the world. I don't think that Margaret Thatcher today would talk the way she did about Germany 20 years ago. These 20 years have shown that all the fears we had about this country now reunified, again, the biggest, most populous, richest nation in a strategic center of Europe, would go back to its old ways. But the last 20 years have shown this was not the case. I mean, let me just give you one good example. In World War II, the Germans could field about 7 million men altogether, and they took them to the gates of Cairo and Moscow. Today, Germans have about a total of 8,000 men abroad from Bosnia to Afghanistan, and they're seriously overstretched. That's the new Germany as opposed to the old Germany.
And does the new Germany feel like a fully integrated, fully accepted member of the West today?
I think it does. I think the West feels that way. I think the Germans feel that way. And none of the stuff that we associate with the German character still glares, still obtains. The Germans have become like everybody else. They're no longer on what the German historians used to call the Sonderweg, a way apart where they marched off into authoritarian governments and aggressive nationalism. I mean, the greatest post-war miracle, way preceding the fall of the wall, is that on that poisoned soil, a kind of exemplary liberal democracy has grown up, which in some respects is a more liberal polity than either Britain or France.
Okay, let's talk economy here. And to start with, I'd like to read something the New York Times published a month ago. Here it goes. With an ambitious new pipeline planned to run along the bed of the Baltic Sea, the Russian natural gas giant Gazprom is driving a political wedge between Eastern and Western Europe. While the Russian-German pipeline offers clear energy benefits to Western Europe, Central and Eastern European leaders fear it could lead to a new era of gas-leveraged Russian domination of the former Soviet bloc. Question is, how economically important are Germany and Russia becoming to each other now?
I think if you looked at the numbers, German trade with Russia is a fraction of Germany's trade with Holland. That gives you a sense of the reality. The other sense of reality is that Western Europe depends for its natural gas on Russia, on Gazprom, for about 25%, which is not really a deadly kind of dependence. Finally, those very same Germans who agreed on that Baltic Sea pipeline, which is clearly designed to go around those fractious poles, there's no mincing of words around it, are now involved in another project, the so-called Nabucco pipeline, way in the south, which will bring Central European gas to Western Europe without even touching Russian soil. So they're well aware of some dependencies here, and they're behaving, I think, in a very prudent way, which is to kind of place various bets all over the place.
Okay, let's talk Poland now. The Chancellor, Angela Merkel, wanted to mend relations with Poland when she took office. Can she do that, given Germany's current relationship with Russia, which, of course, is a country that Poland fears a lot?
Yeah, but I mean, I think we are overdoing this. Again, we are overdoing historical analogies when we have, in history, we have plenty of examples of Germany and Russia ganging up against the West. And another, something the New York Times perhaps hasn't figured out yet is that how careful the Merkel government and even previous governments have dealt with Poland, and trying to establish not just a solid relationship, but friendship. And whenever there is something, the Polish soul is being riled by something or other, the government and I think the media in general are quick to pounce and to reassure. So that old analogy, where Poland used to be the kind of place where the great powers, Russia, Germany, Prussia in those days, Habsburg used to divvy up Poland several times, that too is gone. And that too bespeaks a changed reality in Europe which doesn't, which you can't compare with the nastiness that preceded the current state of affairs. Excuse me.
You take a cough, I'll ask another question while you're perhaps grabbing a sip of water, and that is, we've talked Germany, we've talked Russia. The other significant relationship we've got to talk about here is the United States. How would you gauge the American-German relationship today?
Well, the interesting thing is that you would have expected all kinds of things to happen once the last Russian soldier had withdrawn from Central Europe in '94. You would think that this excruciating strategic dependence on the West and America would have waned, and again the Germans would have become more self-assertive and gone their own way. The first thing that Angela Merkel did when she came to power in 2005 was to reaffirm the American relationship, which her predecessor Schroeder had kind of let slide in what you might say was a kind of anti-American electoral campaign and trying to stop America's war into Iraq. The first thing she did was to mend fences. And so what we have today is a new balance between Germany's European obligations and its American obligations. And I don't know whether you remember, a week ago, Angela Merkel was allowed one of the highest honors the American Congress can bestow, to speak before both houses of the Congress, which no German chancellor, by the way, had ever done before. So that kind of shows you, again, the reality of the relationship as compared to the fears and fantasies which all of us have given the bloody and nasty history that went before.
We recently did a program at the Munk Center at the University of Toronto in which we looked at Berlin 20 years after the fall of the wall, and we had a guest on that program named Anna Porter, who's a very well-known writer in this country and a former publisher. And when she was asked about German reunification, she said it really wasn't reunification. It was more like West colonizing East. Do you agree with that?
Well, colonizing means that you roll into another country and you start exploiting it. Here, the opposite happened. For the last 20 years, we, first the West Germans and then all of Germany, has been subsidizing the East to the tune of 4% of German GDP. 4% is what the Americans spend on their military, the biggest military in the world, just to give you an idea what these figures mean. So if this is colonization, it's a very costly process. What you can say is that, that Germany, extending its social system, its regulations, its taxes, its high wages to the East, especially the currency, had a very simple effect that any first semester economics students could have predicted. That you would destroy the East German economy, and that's what happened. It became uncompetitive. It is still uncompetitive. It still labors under high German wages, but with less productivity per worker. And so it has become not a colony, but a kind of a ward of the West.
I guess I should clarify here, Joseph, that I guess what she said was she'd spoken to many East Germans, rather, who said they felt as if they had been colonized.
Yeah, but yes, I understand you, but I'm giving you the reality and she's giving you quotes. Of course, East Germans, I call this the flesh pot of Egypt syndrome. You can cite lots of public opinion figures where, you know, a majority of East Germans says, well, you know, the old country wasn't so bad. You know, there were a lot of advantages and life was actually quite good. They forget the world they lived in, just like the Israelites forgot that besides the flesh pots, there was also slavery. So yes, you get a lot of resentment. That resentment is numerically expressed in a very high voting for the left party, which is an outgrowth of the old Communist Party of East Germany. 26% of the East Germans voted for that party in the last elections in September. So there is that resentment of those who think they should have gotten more, and there's the resentment in the West of those who think we have given them too much. Give it another 20 years. You know, you need 40 years in the wilderness, marching through Sinai, before you forget the flesh pots of Egypt. And so I'd say in another 20 years, the differences in voting behavior and in emotions will have disappeared. Reunification will certainly be a lot faster in between the two Germanys than between the North and the South in America after the Civil War, which took 100 years.
Okay, on that semi-biblical note, we're going to take a pause and we are going to reconvene after people take a look at something else here, and we will talk about whether the American empire is in decline. So stay tuned, and thank you so much for getting us started tonight, Josef Joffe.